We, let's start from the first line. Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yossi said named Rabbi Yochanan, and Shim Barba said b'shem Rabbi Yochanan named Rabbi Yochanan as well. Ha'okeach abodim min hagoy. Somebody buys slaves from a goy. Amnas l'mo'alon, with the intent to give them bris milah. Okay. Now there are two types of slaves. A true Evet Kanani is one which has a bris milah. Actually, Evet Kanani is chayv in all mitzvahs like a woman, and one more than he needs a bris. Okay. So, a true Evet Kanani has a bris. Nowadays, of course, if somebody were to have a non-Jewish slave, nowadays meaning any time within the past few thousand years, if anybody would have a non-Jewish slave, generally speaking, he wouldn't be a full Evet Kanani, right? Because he really would not convert and not get a bris milah. He'd just be kind of like a sub-employee, I guess we would call him, right? He's not getting paid wages. He's permanently and you're working for you, but he's not the Evet Kanani the Torah was speaking about. He's a goy who's under your subjugation, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. If he took him with the intent to give them bris milah, make them full goyim, and they reneged on the deal. In other words, these avodim actually agreed to get a bris milah, and then they decided they don't want to go along with the program. So you should stand with them 12 months. You try to persuade them to get the bris milah. If they accept it from themselves, the bris fine. And if not, it allows them to go. Now, of course, an Evet Kanani, true Evet Kanani, which had a bris, you're not allowed to sell to a goy because he's quasi-Jewish. But this guy, since he accepts by himself and refused to do so, you can sell him to a goy. Okay? This person bought an entire city of slaves who were uncircumcised, mina goy, amanased them all alone with the intent to circumcise them. Because of them, the entire city reneged on the deal. As the Shaul Rabbanan, so he came and asked the rabbis, what should he do? Amrlei, so the rabbi said, doesn't say which ones, spend 12 months with them. If they change their minds and accept bris milah, that's fine. And if not, you're free to do whatever is done in your country with people who won't subjugate themselves as slaves. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman said that Rabbi Yerushalmi Yevamos so the story of Yerushalmi Yevamos was in Lukaya, a certain city. Rabbi Yehuda and the Sia, Rabbi Yehuda and the Sia was there. Yehuda and the Sia was there. Then boy Mikrutz, they wanted to get up early the next morning and leave on their way. Amrlei, so he said to him, no. Yerushalmi Yevamos said to Rabbi Yehuda and the Sia, Hamte, wait till further into the day. And we will take this giores and we'll dunk her in the mikveh tomorrow in order to make her proper giores. So they had to be Rabbi Zer Shor, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman. Lama. Rabbi Zer asked Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman, why can't they do it at night? In other words, Rabbi Yitzchak wanted to get up early next morning, so why couldn't they fulfill his desire and just do the gate, do the gairus at night, right? So says the Gemara, is it mibnei? It's actually more asked the question. Is it mibnei kavod zaken? Because the honor of Rabbi Yehuda and the Sia doesn't, it's not proper, dignified to take him to the mikveh in the middle of the night. It's because you can't do tefillah at night because it's like an act of bastin, right? So requires to be dayanim in order to do gerus. So therefore, it might not be proper to do it at night, just like any other court case does not take place at night. So it says, so he said, because you can't, and that's the truth, you're not allowed to toivel a gioris in the middle of the night. So any time after nightfall. A case came from Rabbi Yossi, Maulat Bilas Hagerim Balayla. What's the story can you do to toivel the gerim at night? Lohoru, I'm not sure it should be Lohoru or Lohora. He didn't want to paskin in the Shiloh. Because, on the one hand, it's not really a court case. On the other hand, it's similar to a court case, so he didn't want to paskin it. Now, the next the line I'm going to interpret based on the Ridbaz, which is a very interesting way of interpreting it. Everybody else's interpretation is very strange. His is creative. Eved Toshav. If an Eved, besides to be a Toshav, A toshav means somebody who dwells among the Jews but doesn't get a bris milah. That's lolam. He can remain in that status forever. That's not a problem. We don't have a problem with that. Ger toshav. Now here the extra vav. It says not ger toshav but ger vitoshav. And here the Rebbe explains if a person became a ger, meaning the person became a ger toshav, not a Yisrael, obviously, became a ger toshav, which normally keeps Shem Mitzvah Noach, although the Gemara is going to dispute exactly what it is. And then he went back to his previous ways. He was ger, and then with toshav, he went back. Harei could go to hold over, so he go for all matters. In other words, there's no, if a person is a ger tzedek, right, he had a bona fide Jewish gerus, and then reverts to a goyish guy, it's too late, he can't revert, right? But he had a ger toshav, can't revert to being a goy. And what the ramifications are of that the Gemara is going to say on the next page. Said ger v'toshav. If a guy was a ger, then he went back to his old ways, right? We roll around with him and try and convince him to come back for 12 months. If he comes back, that's good. And if not, he is like a goy in all matters. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Chia Bar Yehuda Rabbi Chanina B'Shem Rabbi said, ger toshav, a ger toshav, what's his definition? Tzor kabel alav amnat shelo yochel nevelos. He accepts upon himself, according to this opinion, Rabbi's opinion, a ger toshav must accept every single mitzvah in the Torah upon himself, except he's still allowed to eat treif, which is a nice exception. You can hear that. So that's what a ger toshav is going to do. He has to keep Shabbos, right? We're going to have that on the base with how we keep Shabbos. That's right, but this is a ger toshav, so he's learning ger toshav is a higher madrega than Stam ben Noach. Okay. So, Amrei said, Yomra Daring Kedvaring Keksava. Why don't they just say it like it says in the Torah, like it's written down? My Yomra Daring Keksava, what does it mean like it's written down in the Torah? Amrei Yisrachia Lo Tochlu Kol Nevela, Yushani Nevela, any non-slaughtered animal. La Ger Shebi Sharechot Ninenavachalo. Give it to the Ger who lives in your midst. So here we see that Ger Toshav certainly does not have to keep kosher, right? East Tani that those who learn Ger Toshav Ein Mekal Mosochi Kabel Kol Mitzvah Shekoseh Torah. He's not accepted to accept all mitzvah Torah, including what? Including Vela, right? Including kashrus, except that although it's not explicitly in the Gemara, except the Ritba says bris milah. Ger toshav doesn't do bris milah. And even Kanani has to do bris milah because he's owned by his master, but not a ger toshav. East side of those who said other interpretation. Ger toshav ein mekabel, so you do not accept him until he denies his idolatry. Okay? Now, even though he's got to deny his idolatry, and the way I always learn that is that the Tosfos says many places in Shas that a guy is allowed to worship two or more gods as long as one of them is God, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, Tosfos says it in several places. So I would say the difference between a regular guy and a ger toshav is this difference, that a guy is allowed to worship multiple avodah zaros, right? But a ger toshav already has to relinquish that. Even though he's not fully Jewish, but he has to relinquish that belief in other gods other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's really what defines a ger toshav, in my opinion. Okay?
They say that because they lived in Christian countries.
Of course, they had to say it, right? So ger toshav eichai v'sachich b'avodah zashal yivav b'shir chibar. Ashi said ger toshav. Now here the gears are changed. Just take out the last two words on the line. Rashi says ger toshav. Instead of the first 2.5 words on this line, it says Achich Bar Bavodah Zarah Goy. He says the Ritbaz changes it and the Shai Torah says so to Mevatel Avodah Zarah Goy. So Koshav can cancel Avodah Zarah just like Goy can. Of course, the case is like this: if you have a little idol, a little Yoshka, right? It's Avodah Zarah, right? So if a Goy comes and breaks off Yoshka's nose in the statue, so then it's no longer Avodah Zarah. You're allowed to use it. However, if if a Jew breaks off the nose, so it doesn't work, because only a guy can be vatla avodah zarah. Kind of like takes one to know one, right?
We learn on the Masech.
Right, we learn Masech Avodah Zarah. But a Ger Toshav can be Vatal Avodah Zarah, despite the fact he's no longer worshiping it.
Well, because he's not a full-fledged Jew.
Right, because not full-fledged Jew, that's what he's doing. That's the thing. So he's Mevatal Avodah Zarah Kigoi. Top line, Rabbi said, everybody would agree from all of these, all the people mentioning the Rai, that it's Shishmevato Avodah Zarah Kigoi, that a Ger Toshav can cancel Avodah Zarah Kai. Go Goy. To locate, if that was not the case, what would we say? Hovlim Mitzuva Avodah Zarah Lo Yivatel. Since he's commanded not to worship Avodah Zarah, so therefore he shouldn't have the capacity to cancel Avodah Zarah. The Goyim ain't Mitzuyim Avodah Zarah. Our Goyim commanded not to believe in Avodah Zarah. Nonetheless, even though they believe in Avodah Zarah, when you give them their right, so then the Mevatel, right? They well, not really the right. They can be Mevatel Avodah Zarah, despite the fact that they're over the Avodah Zarah. So you see, if any, certainly that should be true about people who are not over the Avodah Zarah, right? So therefore we say that if a goy can be Mevatel, the Avodah Zarah in his midst, so certainly then the person who just became a Ger Toshav came Vatal Avodah Zarah as well. Amra Yitesar does that Shlo Tomar. Now, Vushavel Yisrael B'Shlosha Dvarim. I forget what this Shlo Tomar is. Oh, so now they want to say right. So why do you have to tell me that you can be Vatal Avodah Zarah? Isn't it obvious, right? So says Mara, because Rabbi Yosef, what's the Chiddush? So Tomar, you shouldn't say Vushavel Yisrael B'Shlosh Dvarim, since the Ger Toshav is equivalent to Yisrael in three ways. Below Tashokin, not allowed to cheat him. Below Sinai, not allowed to abuse him. Below Gitzon, if he does a Ritzicha, if he does a murder unintentionally, he goes like a Yisrael. So therefore I might say Hulo Levatel. So I might say, since the Ger Toshav already assimilates to the Jew, maybe he can't cancel Avodah Zarah, just like the Jew is going to break off Yoshka's nose. That's why I have to say Vatal Avodah Zarah Goy, that he can cancel Avodah Zarah just like he's a Goy, again, because the Ger Toshav is not fully Yisrael. Who's the Tana says now to cheat a Ger Toshav? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, it's for Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. The Tana we learned, Ger Toshav are able to Sashok. Now to cheat a Ger Toshav. Divrei Rabbi Doisa. Rabbi Yehuda. That's right. Yossi Yehuda's position. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ger Toshav, B'Shabbos, Kisrael B'Yontif. Fascinating shita, which gets back to what you asked before. He says the Ger Toshav on Shabbos like Yisrael on Yontif. Right? What we're not allowed to do on Yontif, the Ger Toshav is not allowed to do on Shabbos. It's a fascinating thing, right? So you'd be allowed to do Ochel Nefesh, right? So it says the Gemara, my Yisrael, just like a Jew, regular Jew, B'Yontif Ofen Avasha, on the Yontif he can bake and cook. But he's also in all other types of work, to various different degrees. I've Ger Toshav Shabbos came so to Ger Toshav Shabbos as well. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no, it doesn't go that severely. Rabbi Yossi says a Ger Toshav must keep Shabbos, but not to the extent that you are describing. Rather, Ger Toshav b'Shabbos ki Yisrael b'chol Shamoed. On Shabbos, got to do malacha like Jews do on Chol Moed, only that little.
So you can water the.
What?
You can water the fields with.
Right, something like that. So he's far less restrictive, obviously, right? Ma'isa b'chol Shamoed, just like Yisrael Chol Moed, says the Gemara. Megave Abnei saw that he can gather up twigs from the field. Even though he's also to do the rest of the work of the field. Ger Toshav Shabbos cancel to Ger Toshav on Shabbos has a capacity. Okay? Excuse me. Right, Shimon Omer Ger Toshav b'Shabbos ki Yisrael b'Shayim Moshe. This is really the way we paskin. A Ger Toshav, a settled ger among us, even on Shabbos, is like Yisrael. The rest of the days of the year when Yisrael is scot free, and so too he's scot free as well. My Yisrael, So it says, well, actually, Marfa goes on. Ma'aser b'shayim Moshe Shana Yisrael in any other time of year, no matter how, no matter whatever time of year. B'shayim Moshe Shana, a choresh v'zoreah v'kotzer, you're chayev on a choresh, zoreah, and kotzer, plowing, harvesting. Well, actually, planting and harvesting. Af Geratosha b'Shabbos came. So the Geratosha on Shabbos has the same status. Okay.
So they're just using that as an example, or that's the whole thing? So it's just working the field.
No, it's across the board. Across the board.
So they're just using this as an example.
Right. Rav Yinun and Rav Ada bar Achua b'Shem Rav said, Halach Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, who says Geratosha on Shabbos, like Yisrael the rest of the day, it's a weekday for him, right? Ksiv it says, Kol Eved Ish Miknas Kesef V'Koymer. It says any slave of a person who's acquired by him by money. So in this we actually had yesterday, Eved Ishat Mo'alo V'Al If a person has an Eved, you mal the Eved regardless of the Eved's consent. Benish, a person's son, ain't at molo el ba'kocho. You can't mal him without the father's consent. Now that makes sense, right? No. Rabbi Yochanan bar Yochanan asks, hoim katan at molo el korcho. What if the kid is indeed a katan? Do you mal him against his will? Now, in many ways of interpreting this, but I think that the simple pshat is quite obvious here. So he says, what did I skip?
No. But the cotton here, is that the son of the Eved?
No.
Or the Eved himself?
No, not necessarily. And it means somebody you acquired to be an Eved. So,
going back to the previous thing about the Benish.
yeah.
That's the son of the Eved?
No, it's not a regular Jew. Can't give him bris milah against his will. An Eved you can, but not the son of a Jew. What's the obvious question on that? And a son you can't give a bris against his will?
He's not a bar das.
Of course, it's always against his will. That's where Rabbi Yochanan's question. So it says Gemara.
And the father's high of chorus. Whether the son is agreeing to it or not.
Right. So, Rabbi Yochanan boy, ben katan amolo ben korcho. So what if he's a little kid? You can mal against his will? So it says more, afilu kivno shakinus, even if he's the son of a nobleman, a great nobleman. Now, this really doesn't make sense in context. I would say take it out. It's going to make much more sense the next more Rabbi Yochanan brings down again. I think it probably just slipped in here. And here's so the Gemara, but the more Rabbi Yochanan's question is, what are you talking about? You can't be malakid bal korcho. Of course, all bris milah is about korcho of the kid. Why can't you do it against his will? That's the whole point of it. So it says Rabbi Yechizkiv Shem Rava wanted to say hakeni. This is the way to read the Mishnah. This won't be a kasha. Matzo b'socha. If you find within a I'm sorry. Rechis Hashem Rava said, "How can he matzah b'socha tinok mushlach?" If you found in a city a foundling, right, a kid who's just scattered, thrown by the wayside, he'd be lo shum eved. If you title it for the purpose of making a slave, amol lo shum eved, then you can bris milah for the purpose of slave. Lo shum ben chorin, you can bris milah for the purpose of freedom, right? Amol lo shum ben chorin, you also do the bris milah for the purpose of freedom, meaning for the purpose of a free person as opposed to a slave. Now, and this is supposed to be the answer to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Wait a minute. You see that you see a son can be ma'al bal korcho against his will from an 8-day-old kid. So how can you say that there's a difference between?" Like the Gemara said previously, The Morah said that Eved Isha Molo Baal Korcho, Ben Isha Einab Molo Baal Korcho. It's not true. Sometimes the Ben Isha can be mal against his will, right? So the answer to that is very simple, right? You can be mal against his will, but not against other people's will, right? So it says the Gemara, that's what Gemara is really saying here. Again, let me read her. Chizkib Shem Rava said, okay, this way to read it. If you find a kid thrown in your city, Hikbil Shum Eved, if you tell him for the purpose of Evet, Admol Shum Eved, then you're required to give him a bris milah just as an Evet does. If you mild him for the purpose of Ben Chorin, Admol Shum Ben Chorin, let him go and become a householder. Okay? Well, you let him go and you toivel him for the purpose of...
You convert him to...
Yeah, he's Jewish, but no, it's not an Evet. That's what I was really trying to say. So, again, when it said that you can be mal a guy if he's your son, you can't be mal Baal Korcho, it's because it's talking about an adult, really. We're talking about an adult, and therefore you can't be mal against his will. It calls him a ben, doesn't mean he's a ben. He's a ben chorin. I'm not sure I'm catching the cuteness of this. Question Rabbi Yochanan asks is, you have a brisa which says that if he's an Eved, he can be mal against his will, but not if he's a son. Not if he's a ben. Can't be mal against his will. So Rabbi Yochanan, that's what he's talking about. Of course you can be mal a kid against his will. That's the whole concept of milah min days. So then Rabbi, whoever it is, Rabbi Chizki b'shem Rava said, no! You can be, we misread the brisa. The brisa says you can be mal an Eved against his will. But you can't be mal a free man, not a ben. A ben he can be mal against his will. That's Rabbi Yochanan. He can't be mal a free man against his will. So he changed it from ben to ben chorin. You see what he did? A superficial change.
The ben chorin here, though, is not an adult.
Mm-hmm.
He found an adult.
And he can't, so he can't be mal. Actually, I don't know yet. That's me a good question, because the Gemara will say it's dichotomy between adults and children, but I don't know if the Gemara already got that far yet. That's the next step. So it says, Rabbi Yochanan said, let me ask the other way. It says if you found a foundling in the street, you can toivel him, right? Make him Jewish. No, by L'shum Evet, you toivel him for the purpose of making him Jewish. Well, actually, you toivel him for the purpose of making him a slave, he remains a slave afterwards. Says Mar, if you look at even if he's the son of a great nobleman, meaning, how do you get to be a slave? You can't say any family you find in the street you can make a slave. Maybe he's the son of the governor. The governor has to sell the kid to you. If you find him in the street, you can't make him into a slave. Right?
Yeah, but he's lost. I mean, if no one claims him.
So what? So you give him to the city orphanage, but you can't raise him as a slave. So it says Gemara, so the question is, how can you say if you bought him like an Eved, you sell him like an Eved? How does that work? So Rabbi Elazar B'Shem Rabbi Yosha said, B'Shem Rabbi Yosha, law markein. He didn't say this. Of course he can't be mal Eved against his will, right? Makes no sense, right? Well, of course you can't convert an Eved against his will. Maybe it's whatever. Can't do anything.
But the pasuk says that you're supposed to.
Do what?
Mal the Eved. That's what we have the pasuk in Shmos.
Well.
Eved ish.
Yeah, but now we reinterpret that because we don't like the premise, which is that you can make a person an Eved against his will when he's very young. We simply don't like that premise, so we reinterpret. So it says Gemara, Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Elazar B'Shem Rabbi Yosef said, Lo Markein, the Tzarishon says, Evakol Eved Ish Miknas Kesef. Every Eved of an individual is acquired by silver. Now, what do we do this pasuk? Avdecha Ish says Eved Ish. If your Eved is an Ish, meaning an adult, Amolo Baal Korcho, right? You can still be mom against his will because he's your property. Bincha, your son, Ish, if he's already an adult, ain't up molo al korcho. You can't do bris milah against his will. So we said our buddy we do a bris milah against their will, even their foundlings. That's talking about only when they become adults. You can't do while they're still kids. You have to while they're adults because they have no right to concede to it. They have no capacity to concede when they're kids, right? Making sense?
But when they're adults, they still have no capacity.
What?
If they're an adult Eved, they still don't have the capacity to agree.
Why?
If they're property of the...
Yeah, but we'll ask them. We'll just ask them. You want to go free now?
No.
So, we get
I
still...
know a pasuk that says,
yeah, but he had to get a bris milah anyway.
Yeah.
When he went into slavery, he had to get a bris milah.
Okay. So he's going into slavery as an adult.
Right. He's entering the penitentiary. Right?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. He made it enter the slavery when he was a kid. But when is the first thing you can be malim and fulfill your obligation?
As an adult.
That's what it's saying. Okay? As opposed to if it's your son. If it's your son, bincha ish, if your son grew out to be an adult, ain't molo ba'korcho, you're not allowed to be malim against his will, right? Because you're not allowed to mal your kids against their will if they have their own domains. Kida ma Rabbi Hilo, Rabbi Shem Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Hilo said name Rabbi Yossi, so he buys uncircumcised slaves from the goyim, I'm not slimo, with the intent to give them bris milah, manavshach, no matter what. Ke'eved, now the word manavshach doesn't really fit in the context here, I don't know what got in, but manavshach, ke'eved ishu, what it mean here means what is he? Is he like the slave of a person, right? Admo Lambal Korchon. One second. A marshal cavity issue Admo Lambal Korchon, you can be malim against their will. If you say that they're considered to be avodim, right? Amnat Shalom, if you took them with the intent not to ever give them bris milah, so it could be an issue. Then they're like kids, right? Because you have no lien over them. You can't be malim against their kids, against their will. Now, a person who pulled back his foreskin over his aver, or is born with a bris milah somehow, or he had a bris milah before he became a ger, all these people cannot eat truma. Okay? Now, what it means they can't eat truma is even if somehow they become avadim, they still can't eat truma. Rabbi Zvikon, because they're not fully... how should you put it?
Well, they didn't have a bris for the sake of...
right, they're Israeli. That's how we should put
but
it.
they could do, the ones that were born circumcised could still have a toughest time.
We're going to discuss that. Toughest time is only the Rabbanah, though. It's not going to help with the rice of eating Truma. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the thing of Rabbi Yisrael, B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan said, Mishum Knas. The truth is, if somebody has a problem with his foreskin, then we don't let him eat truma because of a knas. Rabbi fine him. We have a penalty. Rabbi Shmuel Barav Yitzhak Mishum Rav said because it's a decree not to that he shouldn't table, but not that it's actually because he stole anything or anything like that. Manav Ibneon, that we should fine him. Manav Ibneon. So what's the difference between the two opinions? Mashalo echad or achor, if somebody else pulled out his foreskin to make it look like he had a foreskin, or shinish chamel grew on its own. So when you take knas, you're going to say the whole issue is because of knas, and knas, what are you going to find him for? It's not his fault. You take gzeir gozu, you're going to say it's a decree, a marzayin type thing. So if you can't gzeir gozu, tough luck. There's a gzeir, he has to change his ways. Okay? Himol yimol. It says yimol twice. Gezeira l'shtei milos. This is telling us the decree that you have to do 2 milos every time you do bris milah. It's not really 2, but you do the milah, the cutting, and then you do the pouring, the ripping, right? Achal milah v'achal priya. Achas the milah, or one for the milah v'achal sits and one for the excess flesh, which is not actually necessary to cut. Because that's like Rabbi Kiva used himoli moko, it's a double language. Who said the double language comes to include. However, Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi Shmuel the Amr said, that there are so many very often written in synonyms, right? Dibra kedarka, right? She spoke in her fashion. Or the haloch you went. Because you yearned. Gunom kunamte was stolen, etc. We know. So how do we know that? So from here we see that The Torah like people spoke. So the Torah spoke like people spoke, so therefore you don't know Mila and Priya, because he's learning Mila and Priya from the double language, Yimo. But Rabbi Shmuel doesn't dash that. So I just know the Mila and Priya. Rabbi Levi Pazi Oz Amra, because when Tzipora did the Bris Mila on Moshe's son, I forget which one, the first one, Gershom, I think. So because Moshe Rabbeinu was not diligent in doing it, Oz Amra, she said, Chasan Domim! I am the groom of the bride, of the blood of this bride, of this young child. The mulos, and this is for the bris milah. So it says mulos. Mulos is 2 moles, right? One for milah and one for priya. Or achas milah, once for the kariv tzitz, and once to remove the fine amount, the not finer, but the strips of skin which still adhere after you finish the bris milah. Okay? Rav Amar Himo. Rav said took Himo over even further. He said Mikalan Noach Shumo, this individual who was born with a bris, should you still have to remove for him the blood of the covenant. Now, this is really no smachta. Okay?
That's cute, I like that.
What?
It's like double language.
Right.
So the second Himo is for...
right, for Tatovas Dam Bris, for removing the blood. Right. Okay. Himo. From Himo we learn out it takes one to know one. In other words, if you don't have a bris milah, you can't go around performing bris milahs on other people. Okay, if you're RL, you can't do bris milah. Even if it's the same reason, you still can't do it, right? Rabbi Levi says, Ksiv, Vata es brisi tishmor. You should go and watch my covenant, right? You and everybody else like you has a bris milah, but not the guys who don't have bris milah. Time when Yisrael Maal Sakuti. Yisrael can give a bris milah to a Samaritan, but a Samaritan, a kuti, ain't a Maal Yisrael. Why is that? They shumol l'shum har grizim, because they're Maal for the purpose of their avodah zarah and har grizim. That's Rabbi's position. Rabbi Yosef said, big deal. How do milah requires the right kavanah? Let him serve us and bring our moil for the purpose of our reason until he drops dead from exhaustion from being mal all the Jewish babies. And we'll stop here for tonight. We did a blood. Okay.